press this worked. We didn't have any technology difficulties.
Girl, do not jinx us. What are you talking about?
No, it's good. We're good. Usually, if it goes bad, it goes bad quick.
Well,
Like you
mm,
never can get on. Valerie, we've never met, Adrian, but I've heard such nice things about you.
we did meet once.
Uh oh. What was
No,
I
we
doing?
did at St. Michael's. You came to the gathering.
Oh, I did.
Yes, and you sat in front of me and some other friends, and we realized it's funny that I remember this. You were a camper at Trinity when I was a counselor,
Really?
long time ago. So yeah.
Oh,
So we
so
met when you were like 12 and I was like 22. But
no, I'm 49.
well, I'm 53. So I guess I was a little older, but maybe it was high school camp. But I remember talking with you about it because you're Eastern North Carolina, and
Yes.
so am I. I grew up in
Yeah.
Wilmington.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was listening to one of your other interviews, and you were saying, I grew up just above the South Carolina line. And I was like, oh, she must be from, well, I was trying to guess what county.
Well, it's so funny because Wilmington now is like a big town, right, of like 200,000 people. But at the time, we were like 30,000 people because I-40 did
Really?
not connect to Raleigh. It stopped in Raleigh. So when I was an undergrad at Duke, when I was like my first couple years, it took better than like 3 hours to get from Wilmington to Durham. And I can remember like buying my prom dress in Myrtle Beach because that was the big city. So yeah,
Right.
I feel like I grew up as close to Myrtle Beach as I did, much closer than Raleigh. So
And how long does it take now from Wilmington to Duke?
yeah, like 5 minutes. It's maybe 2 hours and 20, 2 hours and 30. I mean, but it's just such a much easier trip because you're not like going through Benson, Mule Days, and you know.
Right, a straight shot. Well, so we live, have you ever been up this, so I'm northeast, Edenton. Have you been
Oh
up
yeah, no, I've
this?
been to St. Paul's because I'm good friends with Harris Vaughn from back in the day.
Oh, now
So
see, all these things are coming.
I know
Eastern North Carolina is always a small
it's
place.
a small place. It's a small place. So,
Well,
but I'm
it
happy to
used,
be here because you've built such a thing just on.
well, YouTube is sort of new for me because Facebook is always driving me crazy. I tend to get myself into trouble all the time. So I'm like, maybe YouTube is a safer landing for me.
Well, I admire it because I think, my training, I've been at the Journal for 19 years and my training is to
Yeah,
be
tell us a
very.
little bit about you.
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, and I went to Duke as like a rare North Carolinian in those days to go to Duke on a scholarship. They were trying to get more kids from North Carolina. And I taught English. You taught for a while. I taught English as a second language in
Okay.
Japan when I was right out of school. And then I came back and got involved in journalism, and I love it. I still love it after all these years, but most of my career has been spent in small towns in the South. So yeah.
And you currently work full time for the Wall Street Journal.
I do. I'm back at where I took a long leave to write this book, which I'm so excited to talk to y'all about.
Yeah,
But
I was wondering how you did both things. I was like,
not very well, but then, it's exciting that I took a long leave. The typical book leave is like 6 months at a big
huh?
at the Journal or the Times. Oh, hi, Holly from Greenville. This is very exciting to see, like, Minnesota's in the house. I mean, people are here. That's wonderful. Um, so I generally speaking, you take a 6-month leave, but, you're a working mom, I'm a working mom, and
This
having
is a very thick book.
I have another 100 pages that I didn't get to put in here. But just between the first, I tried to keep writing back at the Journal, my day job, but I just wasn't finding the time to devote to it. And I realized that this was, I'd spent my life, observing the rural South, and this was my
Right.
chance to tell the story of what I'd seen. And so I went to my boss and I said, I can't do it in 6 months. There's no way. I need longer. And I went to my husband. I'm like, I have to take an unpaid leave. This is the story of my life. And he's like, well, I know you want to do it and you'll regret it if you don't. So let's just make it work. And I took 18 months and I devoted it full time to the book. So now I'm back, but I did take a nice long leave to focus on this book.
Not that this is about me, because your book is way more exciting than my book that I have coming out.
Like,
Um,
yeah, but yours is
I
very
mean,
brave. I mean, it's very from a very personal place, which is great.
autism out loud. It is. It's personal and it's fun, but like this is, on Friday night. you're not like, I think I'm gonna read Adrian's book. You're like, I'm gonna go read about Alec Murdaugh.
And I hope y'all, I hope y'all that you'll that it keeps you, like, you get to the end of a chapter and you keep going. That's the
So I
whole.
haven't finished because someone that I'm married to took the book from me.
Because he's we don't talk about him much, but he's a lawyer. Is that right?
He's a yes, I said you should join me. I'm not talking. He's a criminal defense attorney and
So he
he
knows this whole landscape.
yes, and so you I think he really he's not one to freely give compliments and he was incredibly complimentary. I think if anything he was like, "She's coming on your page."
That's you really. I mean, I'm sincere when I say my hats off to you, because it's so difficult to build something, to build, just by force of personality and interest and smarts and work to build something. So I'm happy to be here. And look, there's like
Well,
Victoria, Canada's in the house, St.
look,
Augustine, Florida. I mean,
Hugo from
Finland.
Finland.
What are you doing here, Finland? That's amazing.
Just
So,
hanging out. Well, what I love about a video is that I was talking with somebody today that's a kind of a big public schools person in North Carolina that I saw in Raleigh.
oh,
And she was
Was it
saying,
Joe Green? You can say.
no, no, it was not him. It was someone who's has to be nonpartisan, but But she said, I go around and I talk, and I was like, you just find when you get on a video, you can reach so many people that you can't reach other ways. And it can be personal and fun. It doesn't have to be so. I mean, you and I don't have a script, I like that. I kind of think that's exciting. So, one thing you said that I think is really interesting is when I was watching I've got it on my other thing. When you just said, I've lived in the South, you said money. This is a story of money and power and the way it works in a rural area.
Yeah.
And that's the part that you're saying you had seen your whole life. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that on its face, it's the reason that the reader is here, and I hope that if y'all get a chance to read it, you'll see that we start with homicides. The reason that we're here is the death of Maggie and Paul. But the reason that Alec existed and thinks he could get away with it is because of the nature of the rural South. And this whole concept, before was at the Journal, I worked in South Carolina for a number of years covering state politics. And there are these rural barons. It's a very specific phenomenon to the rural South, but you have one family in a lot of communities that has an outsized amount of power. And in a place like Hampton County, they've exercised it for more than 100 years. So for me, it was a familiar story in a sense that, oh, and for your international viewers, which is amazing, like dynasties are a phenomenon that are Chinese, they're Russian, they're English, they're American. Dynasties fail. It's the nature of dynasties to fail. And this is what we're talking about. It's an American story that fails on the fourth and fifth generation because the center can't hold. There hasn't been accountability for 100 years. So that's what I mean. On the face, it's a story about a murder that's just horrific and awful in an interesting place. And then you get into the death of Mallory Beach, Stephen Smith, Gloria Satterfield. It's all these other things. But at its heart, it's a story about money and power, in my view.
Yeah, and give us just I know you've probably done this 8,000 times, but if somebody has not read The Devil at His Elbow, Alec Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty, I spent a tremendous amount of my time myself just
Yeah.
because but I would watch every day. And then at night, I would give like a 30 minutes, basically Hello Magazine
Well,
type.
can I ask you, I mean, why do you think you watched, if you had to guess?
I probably shouldn't admit it, but to me, it just felt like somebody in my circle.
Yeah.
Not that I feel like my family's from Ohio and moved here, in a Volkswagen Bug and a 6-foot trailer that my mother said one half full. But
But you
I,
grew up in Rocky Mount. Don't,
I
don't
grew
forget.
up in Rocky Mount. I have I married somebody whose family's been in North Carolina a long time, and it was like everywhere. And you talked a little bit about this too, like you were reaching out trying to talk to people about the story, and it was like, well, that's so and so's aerobics teacher. That's this interconnection, like you just said to me.
Yeah.
I've been to Edenton with Harris Fawn. I've she's Valerie's been to
Yeah.
my church here, and that's how it is. And so I think when you're particularly the wife and the son, I think we see murders of spouses, and that it seems strange, but I think the murder of your own child for someone that's not I,
Mhm.
it just I think that's what got me. And I was like you, I was following it before, and then not closely, but I had heard about the boat accident, and then it was like, what? Crazy. You couldn't make up. You could not make it up.
Well, and I wish that I were smarter than I am. It took me about 18 months to think it through, like why. And so I was at the trial every day. I just saw a note from one of the viewers who was there too. I was there every day, and towards like the second and third week of 6 weeks, we had people on the line that were driving in and lining up at 4 in the morning from like St. Pete and Cleveland and all these places. And generally, I would try to stop and talk to a couple of like people, and they said exactly what you just said. I hate the fact that spouses kill spouses. I hate it. It happens. I get it. How do you kill your own child? And I think it's one level deeper than that. So right now we're coming up on Susan Smith's parole hearing on the 20th. And Susan Smith drowned her toddlers in John Long Lake up in South Carolina back in the 90s. That is one thing. It's awful. You understand it. It does have everything you could want for really good mystery. You're right about that. But I think what my daughter who's in high school was reading Shakespeare when I was writing the book, and I was like, all right, in Shakespeare is there precedent for a man to kill his grown son? There is not. There is one, Titus Andronicus, and it's a terrible play, and he killed like 100 people. So among those 100 people, he killed his son. And I actually called my priest and I was like, hey, help me remember the Old Testament. I mean, like Abraham and Isaac, he's willing to kill his son. Doesn't go through with that.
Mm.
Greek mythology, you're talking about like Cronus and Zeus and his sons. He eats them and then he spits them back up, right? So even in the stories we tell ourselves, it's such a taboo to kill your adult son. So I
Mm.
think on some level, you know, we're moms, right? I mean, you're when your child is an adult, it's unfathomable, and it's subconscious. But I think that's part of the reason. In addition to everything else that was interesting about the story, it took place in an interesting place. It had everything. There are all these other elements to it. He robbed the least of these, but I think at its fundamental level, we couldn't understand how he did it.
Well, and you told what I think Elliot Murdoch is now. What was his sentence ultimately?
Well, it's complicated, obviously, because he's a complicated dude. It's hard to keep his criming separate. But in the end, he was 53 when the homicides were committed. He will spend the rest of his life in jail, no matter what. So
Mm.
he was sentenced for life in the deaths of Maggie and Paul. There is a significant chance. I mean, I couldn't say it's 50-50, but a good chance that we see a new trial in the homicides, and we can talk about that. But the insurance policy for the state is the epilogue of the book, which is when he pled guilty to all the financials, and so they
Which
were able
is enough
to
to
say
stay in jail forever, I think my
ever
husband was
in
saying.
state custody. You do not get to go to club fed. He is going to be in state custody right now in the upstate of South Carolina for a really long time, the rest of his life. So that regardless of what happens, so his sentence as a practical matter is he'll never be able a simple thing like to sit here and talk the way you and I are talking, or to go out to Zaxby's or whatever and get something to eat. He'll never do that again in his life.
Mhm.
Just amazing.
I spent Seton Tucker, who admires you and has done her podcast,
A good
and
friend, yeah, a very good friend. I love her.
yeah, she's just been awesome and always willing to come on and talk. And she was at the trial and saying how hard it was not to, you couldn't have your phone, so you're like
Yeah.
writing notes, and but when I was
Oh, I
asking her, I
should I
said,
should show you. Forgive me. I want to show you something real quick.
okay, yeah, the devil at his elbow.
So yeah, we couldn't have computers. So these are my notebooks.
You're like I mean, that is
It's
a
great, but
lot
they're
of
organized.
writing.
Would you like this is let's see which one. Let's see, what is this? But yeah, you can say like, all right, here's the day that Alec testified or whatever. This is jury pool day one. So yeah, we couldn't.
What is the most interesting that one there you have?
The most interesting one is the day the man testified. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Like the feeling when Jim Griffin gets up and said, and because we had been debating, and even Seat and I had been debating, I think the night before, would he actually do it? Would he actually take the stand? It's such a risk. And when Jim Griffin gets up and says the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, would like to take the stand, we're like, my favorite is, because I came back and wrote the book after the trial, and I was going through my notes, and in the margin, I'd written, is this really happening? So,
Well, I was taking notes, but I don't have my notes. But I remember you're like taking me back of thinking
yeah.
if that recording of him at those kennels had not surfaced, this never would have happened.
Remind me to come back to Karen's question about the towel. I I
Okay.
I've seen the chat, which is so amazing that y'all are into the book. No, there's no chance, and you'll see in the book that there's no chance that Alec would have been charged, but for the video, and David Owen, who had not given interviews to speak of, told me as much. Creighton Waters, who I talked to many hours, said as much. But for the kennel video, it would have been too hard to prove a case in Colleton County. But one of the jurors told me, and he's was a terrific juror, said, if he if if he wasn't there, how did he know when to lie about not being there or whatever? Like he
Ah.
he just it doesn't make sense. He was there 90 seconds before they died. How did he know when to lie about not
Sandy, that is exactly you've just hit the nail on the head. What I can't remember that I talked about was when he was calling his son
Paw Paw?
Paul. It felt so contrived.
You'll see that in the cross
I'm
examination.
not there yet.
Well, girl, buckle up. I mean, I hope that the I hope that y'all enjoy the book. Enjoy is the weird word when you talk about such a dark
I
topic.
I know. There
But I
is
hope it keeps you
there's
reading, and I do think that, the trial was so Bubba is the hero of Hampton County. The trial was so propulsive in and of itself. There was a part of me that was sitting there every day, even in the testimony that was very dry and procedural. You didn't know what was gonna happen next.
mhm.
But no, I think when he said "Paw Paw," and we're like, "What?" And then he said "Mags," and we said, "What?" And Creighton Waters got up and said, "Have you ever one time in 4 hours of recorded interviews or any other conversation with anybody in law enforcement referred to Paul as Papa?" And he said, "I'll call him anything you like, Mr. Waters." He goes, "No, you call him what you want, but there's a reason you're calling him Papa, and it's to
Right,
there's a reason we call our children by pet names." So
right, right. So you got to really interview some people, and you said in one of these podcasts, you said, "I bought a bunch of bunt cakes and sat
I
on
did,
porch
the mini ones, the really good ones.
and sat on porches and drank lemonade." And you said one of your colleagues said, "Do you know what a passport your accent is?"
Yeah.
And I just like love that. Like they saw like this girl's from here. So sometimes when I talk to people that are real Eastern North Carolina, I feel like I go deep into like,
Well, you're not from Windsor.
yeah, Windsor. So it's interesting. I just love that. And so tell me
Well,
how
but
you
it's funny
how
because
that
I taught
happened.
I taught ESL for a while, a long while, and I was a
Right.
French major, and I spent a long time studying Japanese, and there's a part of studying other languages that evens your accent out. And then I've been at the Journal for 19 years, and for the first 10, I covered corporate news, and so there was a part of me that was very much you want to go into an interview with an investment banker covering banking as a person of a serious person. And so I feel like, to my regret, and Dolly Parton talks about this. I don't know if you've watched about Dolly Parton's America, but listen to that
No.
podcast. It's amazing. But she talks about like this instinct to flatten your accent. and how much it is um bittersweet. And so I felt like my accent is not as strong as as I as it used to be, like when I was on the phone with my grandmother when I was a kid. But but yeah, it is. I mean, I think I couldn't write the story. The bottom line is I couldn't write the story if it was in, Southern California or northern Maine. It's not where I'm from, but this is the dynamic I've witnessed my entire life, and these are people that I know and really love. So,
Tell us a little bit about
but
this
thank you
kind
for
of.
being so prepared. You've really done your homework.
Well, I just was because I hadn't finished the book because my thief of a husband had it. I was like driving to Raleigh.
Please
I was
thank
like, which is good that he has it because he was like, I might read your book. I was like, I don't think so. I don't think you need to. Um, you talked about this petri dish
Oh,
that.
Beverly, did you interview John Metters?
Oh,
I'm very fond of John
who
Metters.
is John Metters?
John Metters. John Metters was the essentially the second chair prosecutor to Creighton Waters. He was the one that was hired at the 11th hour in like December of 22 before the trial started, like January 17th of 23. And
Mm,
he was the one. There was this I loved writing the trial part because there was so I mean, there's like 200 pages of transcript that you have to like get down to the readers of like 4 pages of what you really need to know.
right.
And John Metter's closing, he had the second closing. So there was that first closing where Creighton Waters went through his whole PowerPoint, and there was like the famous clip art of a man on the habit trail. Like anyway,
Uh-huh.
like trying to keep everything going. And then Jim Griffin, gave the response. And then at the very end, there was like a 25-minute closing by John Metters. And he stands up and says, my mom gave me the Velveteen Rabbit. The number one lesson is to be real. And he's like, and who was real? Shelley Smith was real. Blanca Simpson was real. I mean, Marion Proctor was real. Who was not real? Alec, you know.
Mm,
And then he says words to the effect. It was such a wonderful oration. And his father is a was a bishop. He died not too long ago. His father was a bishop in the Methodist Church. So he's like this fantastic preacherly voice. And he
mhm.
said, I believe that Alec loved Maggie. I believed he loved Paul. And I was standing as close to him as I am, like, the corner of this room. You know who he loved more? And he leans over to the jury and he goes, "Alec." And I believe that's true. He loved himself and his name more than anything else, even his son.
And you really delve into a part of the story that most of us, I don't think, know, the petri dish that created Alec Murdaugh, which even his Seaton was kind of giving me some backstory that Alec's dad, Paul's grandfather, he was in an accident when he was younger and injured a young woman. I mean, this is
Did.
generational behavior, which I didn't know. Tell us a little bit about that.
And that's the reason this project was so, engrossing to me. Alec is a deeply bad person. He is. I mean, but he did not like spring from whole cloth. And anything that I included, there's 3 chapters on the history: his great grandfather, his grandfather, and his father. And anything that they did or that I try to show you that they did that was unethical, immoral, had consequences for other people, um, was something that he had done before, right? So the reason to talk about his father when he was a teenager, a 16-year-old, getting into a wreck in Beaufort County, T-boning a car, a young mother, and it was a hit and run. The reason to talk about that, it was hit and run. He got found out, and then his father came and apologized to the woman, and they dealt with it quietly. Well, guess what? How many
The great grandfather.
Yeah, the great-grandfather that and so we had a hit and run, and then the great-grandfather was an insurance fraud, and Alec was insurance fraud by the side of the road. So I tried to be, really disciplined about, like, the only reason I'm telling you the history is because every string of it relates to the craptastic human being that's Alec Murdaugh.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and nature versus nurture. I mean, it's such an interesting
Yeah.
conversation that we think we know a lot about, and I think as I have 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a daughter, and then my 11-year-old with autism, and I do think a lot when you see these types of crimes or the one Brian Laundrie, who Gabby Petito,
Yeah.
and it's like, who is raising I mean, I think as a mother of sons, I think, "Who am I raising?" And what it I think you can't not think about those types of things, and I always say, whatever I do, at the end of the day, I can say with my whole heart, I have done the best I can. And I think a lot of times in these situations, those people couldn't say that.
No, I think that is so poignant. I'm a mom too. So growing up in Wilmington, as I mentioned, Maggie Murdaugh spent her junior high school years in Wilmington. So she went to Roland Grice. I went to DC Virgo, so crosstown schools. But we had a lot of my church friends all knew her, my youth group friends, and we were roughly the same age. And I have two teenagers as well. And so a hard thing with me with Paul was, at what point does a teenager own his own behavior?
Mhm,
And he had had multiple drunk driving wrecks before he was 19, and the wreck that killed Mallory Beach. And then he had multiple drunken driving incidents that as I understand it, after that, before he was even 22. So the the young man was on a trajectory of danger. Somebody was going to get hurt. If he's 16, do the parents own that behavior? If he's 19, does he own that behavior? And what's more is, if he wasn't raised, and I don't find any evidence that he was raised, that he
mm,
had a that he had any box to operate in, like there's any
mhm.
consequences. That was the one thing that, I hired a fact checker, and she's wonderful. Her name is Julie Tate. She works in the New York Times, and she's relentless. She wanted to see every quote I had, all my off the record quotes, even to know who it was and what they said and why, just to vet everything. She listened to everything that I listened to. She was fact checking with Mark Tinsley, who's a key character in the book. And the only thing he pushed back on in the entire book is, there was a line where I said he held Alec and Maggie as responsible for Mallory's death as Paul. And he got so angry at my fact checker, and he said, that is not true. I hold them more responsible,
Oh,
because Paul didn't have a chance. And he knew Paul since he was low single.
tiny.
Isn't
Uh-huh.
it? I found that really complicated as a person who was kind of primed to think about Paul's actions and all the consequences they caused other people. But then you also think, as a parent, like, gosh, did he have a chance?
Well, and my initial thought, or what I've said to my people that two are about to get their license, one has it, is these are non-negotiables, right? So if you were to drink and drive, there will be no more car.
Yeah.
And I mean it. So, at that point, if your child makes a bad decision, well, they wouldn't happen again because there'd be no car.
Well, and what happened here, and you'll see it in the book, is that there were multiple times that he crashed drunkenly, and one time totaled his own car, one time totaled another kid's car. Same thing had happened previous generation. And what they did was use, in my view, use stolen money from clients to pay off the value of the other car, to not get insurance involved and to make it go away. And that's what Morgan says happened to Morgan Dowdy,
Mm.
policy.
And was he, let's talk a little bit about this because when I was thinking, the only person that would kill their child would be a drug addict. Was he a drug addict?
Um, he was using a huge amount of drugs. I don't think there's any question that he was, 6'4", 260, taking a huge amount of oxy that he'd been taking for close to 20 years, because he had a bad knee injury and started taking opioids, hydrocodone or whatever, in the early 2000s. There's no doubt in my mind that he was taking a lot of drugs, and he certainly was withdrawing the day before, in that of the homicides, the day they were in Columbia at that baseball tournament. He was withdrawing. He was throwing up. He was all the hallmarks of opioid withdrawal. And there are other
Mm.
times he was withdrawing, people I knew and have talked to who were there. So there's no question in my mind that he was physically addicted to opioids. But was it the dominant motivator in his life?
Mm.
There's no evidence that it was. He was, I think he was addicted to a lifestyle, and he was addicted to his name more so than anything else. I truly do. And so I also think it's possible, and I show this in the I try to show this in the book. If y'all have ever known, and I think a lot of us, especially in Eastern North Carolina, a lot of us have known or have family who have faced opioid addiction. It's awful. It's a hellscape. And I do think he was that Monday. So Sunday he was going into withdrawals. On Monday he testified right after the homicides. He was back on pills. So was there a confrontation over the pills up at Moselle during the dinner? He can't remember anything about. He can't remember why he reached into Paul's pocket. Had Paul taken his pills? I mean, there are all sorts of open questions about that. But in the end, I'm not convinced that there's any evidence that pills were the reason he acted like he did. Yeah.
You you interviewed Blanca a good bit, who was their housekeeper.
Yes.
And tell us about Blanca kind of coming to a decision about Alec.
Well, I feel like Blanca, I mean, one of the things that was so interesting to me about working on this book for 3 years, and from the very beginning, the publishers who were interested in the book said, he's such a bad person. Who is the reader going to pull for? So in my mind, I was always looking for who's trying to stand up to this system, who is trying to unwind the system, who are the protagonists. Angela McLaurin's in the house. Hi, she knows what I'm talking about. Um, yeah. So anyway, there. Now I lost my train of thought. She's someone who really knows this case. So
Look,
ask
she said, "I believe someone else was there." No, of what Blanca, how
what
what
Blanca
was
was saying. So Blanca was a person
where was
that
Blanca?
So Blanca Simpson was the woman who had known the family for a really long time, 20 years. And after Gloria Satterfield died in 2018, Blanca came back and was the main housekeeper at Moselle. And if y'all have anybody in your family, if your mom's ever putting away your clothes, or you know where your stuff goes. Like if you go into your child's room and you're putting away their clean clothes. So when she was on the stand, I remember watching her and she was saying, well, his shirt should have been in this drawer, and she's pulling it out, or if it was in the closet, it would have been on this shelf. She knew that family inside and out. And
Right.
so she believed in Alec. She loved him like a brother. And so there was a moment during the trial, that one of your viewers alluded to earlier, where she had not accepted that he'd done it. And then she was watching the body cam, because that's the first time any of us saw the body cam. Was Daniel Green's testimony, the first day of testimony.
Right.
She's watching the body cam of Alec, and he's distraught, he's physically shaking, it's hot, he's rubbing his face. They open to his gross, yucky Suburban car, which is the doors open. He pulled up on the kennels, the doors open, the flashers are on. He's got like a Mountain Dew and a big spit cup, and then some sunflower seeds and all this normal detritus that's in his car, his Suburban. She cleans it out every week. She looks in the and for like 1.8 seconds, I've watched it so many times, you can see that there's a wadded up beach towel in the front seat of the Suburban. And she made her husband back that clip up and watch it over and over again. She's like, he did it. I know he did it because there's no reason that towel should be in the car. Isn't that funny? Like your laundry. She had washed that towel
Yeah.
and she'd folded it and put it back up on top of the shelves over the washing machine for Maggie to take back to the beach house. And she knew she'd just done it. And so there's no reason except that he would have been wet, whether he showered at the house or whether he came back from washing himself off at the kennels. And the first room that you go into, the shortcut into Moselle's through the laundry room, unless he grabbed that towel. And that was how she knew. Isn't that amazing?
And you went to Moselle
I did.
with the jurors.
I did.
And did that make it feel even more believable that he had done it?
Um, you know, I think the jurors will tell you that it did. The lawyers, I think, with Truth Serum. I've known Dick Harpootlian for 24 years because when I used to work in South Carolina, he was the person I talked to all the time. Um, from the opening argument, the defense had asked for that visit, right? And the point was like, if you're on piece of property that's 1,770 acres, twice the size of Central Park. If there's shots fired down at the kennel, you can't hear it up at the house. Maybe he was taking a nap or whatever. So that was the point, is that, you're so far from the kennels and hangar, you couldn't have heard it. But what I think it backfired, because when we got out there, what you realized, and many people told me this, the proximity between the kennels, which are very modest, and the shed, the little hangar, is like 12 small steps. And they're
Wow.
open air. They're all open air. So it's not like closed off buildings that you can't see. So there was an ability to see scope. Like I'm a person that can't look at a blueprint and understand what the house looks like. My husband can, I can't.
Mhm.
There was a part of that when you got out there, you're like, oh my God, she was right there. She was right, 12 steps from where Paul died when she died. Yeah.
Valerie,
But
what
it
do
is
you
funny. You'll appreciate this. So, because you're in Raleigh a lot. Um, I went to Moselle, and it's on this page, the
Mhm.
the photo, and that dress was one that I bought at Uniquities. I love that dress. Um, I've never worn it again. It's so That experience was so heavy and emotional, um, that it feels, you know, isn't that amazing? I mean, isn't that weird? But just being in that place was so heavy. I just haven't.
Well, and I think you're right. I think whenever we're talking about it, you feel like, oh, it's this salacious story, kind of gossipy. But at the end of the day, this mother and son, what a just such a tragedy. And then there's one son that's been left, behind with no family.
Yeah.
And that's pretty heartbreaking for anybody, you know.
No, I think that I've had the book came out on August 20th. It has resonated with a lot of people, which is amazing. And I've done several many podcasts and interviews and events, and it's been an honor. The only question that I always get is, how is Buster?
Mm,
What's up with Buster? And I think that's just our humanity. I mean, he
right,
lost his mother, his father, and his brother, and
right.
his name, right? And his in a way, and I think many lives are this way when there's such a tragedy. It's like a demarcation line between what was and the next thing. There's such a solid line between what his life was and what it's always going to be. And I say this in the book. He's tried to move on with his life, but it's hard with that name and that hair.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. You don't blend in well.
No, but from what I understand, he's doing he's doing he's doing well. He's engaged and living in Bluffton, and with his former girlfriend who was at the trial every day, and they were in law school together the one semester he was there. And so she's a lawyer. So I think it's just hard. He's
Yeah,
still a young man.
I hope I hope the best for him. So, and the last thing I just want to go over is that day, Alec says, I saw them 2 hours ago. You talked about it.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen them. And there was this clip that Paul was FaceTiming a friend to
Yeah.
show the friend
Yeah.
his dog. You hear Alec in the background say something, I think, to the dog, very clearly him.
Yeah.
Did Alec knew that video existed, right?
We don't know the answer to that. There is and my it's over here to my right, but I've got like a 120-page timeline of every minute of that day. What's
Okay.
clear to me is that when Alec, after Paul is shot, and he calls 911, and he goes over to check on Paul, and he says, I picked up his phone, started to thinking maybe, and then I put it back down. It's um, it in the photos that have been presented. The phone is sitting right on like the like the where the belt is of his khakis. It's not a place you would put your it's doesn't there's no reason that would be there except another human intentionally set it there. But what you can tell if you overlay the 911 call with the time we know that Rogan Gibson, the friend whose dog was sick, was calling and texting Paul. The second that Alex on 911 and he says, should have known and all that stuff, Rogan is dialing in. So he's with his son's body when that phone is ringing. And there was so much confusing evidence about when a phone was picked up and when it was put down.
Right,
But
right.
there is a strong sense of when that phone was being picked up. It's because Alec was going, I'm calling, later, I'm calling Maggie. Does it register? I'm calling. Do I have enough of a signal? And then he puts it back down. That's what the prosecution was trying to tell us, but they can't draw those inferences for us. But the timeline is very clear about that to me, you know.
What stuck out to me was the way he described that he picked him up.
My shirt is ruined.
Well, it's just wet. You can take it off. Sorry.
You gotta put it on your
Okay.
pajamas.
All right. It's my 11-year-old. His shirt is ruined because he
Hi,
spilled
Amy.
water on it. Let's try to keep him quiet. The way he described picking him up was like, how did he say it? He had no blood on him. Like he picked him up. It was just a way that I thought that's not how you would pick up someone.
No, and that's one of the things
That was
that
big
the
for me.
detectives detectives would tell you, like on the stand and then also privately, is like when they would come up, and I covered the cop beat for many years when I was younger. A family member who's that in shock, and you're holding on because there's a part of you that thinks if I hold on, they're going to be alive or they stay alive. You're covered in biological material. It's awful. You're grieving and even the treads of his shoes walking out in a bloody area, even the tread, they were clean because he had changed. Well, in my view, he had changed his shoes multiple times.
Mhm.
So, yeah, there was a big tell there. And guess who picked up on it first? A young working mom of three who does the laundry. Like, why would his clothes be clean? That was Laura Rutland, the detective from Carlton.
That and so why didn't they go in the house and get his clothes to look for clothes that night?
You know, and they'll tell you this. I think mistakes were made for sure, but here's the thing. Um, Moselle is so far. Even when we went from the courthouse with the jury, it took us 22 minutes just going straight shot. No stop. Once you get out of Walterboro, there's no stoplights. You're just going. It's far. It took Daniel Green, the first officer in the scene who was at the courthouse, roughly 20 minutes with blue lights and siren. It's just so far. So when you have a crime scene that's a very rural area, think about the fact that your nearest police officer is 20 minutes away. That gave a lot of time to, if you were inclined to alter the scene, that gave a lot of time for it. It was remote. It was dark. It started to rain. The first responders were the sheriff's office, and the sheriff had just been run out of town a year earlier on corruption charges by Creighton Waters. And there was a new sheriff in town who gets out there and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is Murdaugh territory. I've got to get SLED here because there's so many potential conflicts of interest." And then, the way we run law enforcement in a region, David Owen, the lead agent, lives in Charleston. You cover a 14 county area. So it took him 2 hours to get there, even when he got right out of bed. So you're talking about like, and I believe this is true, a crime scene is like a stove. It gets cooler the second you turn it off. And so
Mhm.
there were all these decisions that were made before Sled got there. The crime scene, the yellow tape is around the kennels and the hangar. They couldn't even see that there was a house. So I don't make
Mm.
excuses for them. They made a bunch of decisions that are really questionable. Sled did.
Mhm.
But I also know from covering rural crime scenes, it is not easy. And once it starts raining, and you've got and Maggie, may she rest in peace, she was out in the rain, and Paul was in such a compromise. There was water everywhere. There was so much difficulty with multiple agencies involved. So, they didn't search the house because they didn't think the house was involved. It's far.
Mhm.
It's 300
Mhm.
yards, from or more from the
From there. And he had the last thing I'll ask you about, just because this is totally my own interest, this raincoat that he went to his mother's house.
Yeah.
So the thought is he kills them and then rushes to his mother's house.
Um,
Is that right?
I was looking at, sorry, I was looking at Karen's question. Yes. So there is so in John Metters, who we were talking about a little bit earlier, in the redirection with David Owen, the lead sled agent, he tries to say, well, he tries to put the pieces together. Like, why did we show you this raincoat and tell you how much gunshot residue was on the inside? He says, well, could you wrap guns in a raincoat? Sure, you could. Could you wrap wet clothing? Could you put things in a raincoat, or could you put things in a cooler, like a good old fashioned cooler? And we know there was a cooler that was weirdly dumped out by the shed. I think he was trying to explain, to give the jury openness to say, well, maybe and Jim Griffin said, are you telling me that he like stripped down buck naked and hosed off and then threw all of his wet clothes in the cooler? See, it's like, well, maybe they're trying to give you possible ideas of the way that you could sanitize a scene by getting rid of the clothing and guns.
Mm.
And a very plausible theory is this rain jacket that had gunshot residue in, rolled up like it had guns in it, shows up at Alameda. Shelley Smith tells us. Then the guns are he takes his dad's car around, the one that doesn't have GPS in it or whatever, it doesn't have a black box, to all around the property. Maybe he's getting rid of the gun somewhere on the property. They were just trying to give us enough sense that he had a way, a mechanism for doing what he
Mm.
might have wanted to do.
Yeah, Karen asked about the 200 plus steps, which is a lot of steps.
So many steps. And I think that and Creighton Water says, what are you doing? Doing jumping jacks? You run you running around. It really is. If you try to do 200 steps that fast, yeah, I mean, the timeline, if you're deeply into the case, the timeline of between like 8:44 p.m. and like 10:26 p.m. is so interesting to print out. There's one timeline that Peter Rudofsky, the sled agent, presented in court. There's another like 86-page PDF that they've given us that explain, wow, you know, Maggie's phone is here. Maybe it's in the golf cart. Maybe he dropped it in the golf cart or whatever while he's running around. I mean, there's all this. You can string it together, even though it's hard.
It's math, really, right? So
Yeah.
Angela wants to know your thoughts on Becky,
Well,
which
and
is
Angela knows Becky. She knows this case, like I said, better than anybody. So Becky is Becky Hill, the clerk of court. I was at an event last night at the law school at Campbell, and the dean said, in a small county, like, the clerk of court can be the most influential person in the county, much less the courthouse. And Becky certainly played that role in this major case. She was in high school, she was Miss Walterboro. Her family was multi-generations there. She knew everybody. She knew half the jury that got sat. I mean, isn't that amazing? She knew them personally.
wow.
So there was a familiarity now, and then, as your folks will know, I mean, there's this whole allegation around whether she was overly familiar. Did she tell him too much? So she resigned not too long ago, and has some criminal investigation that's pending, but nothing's been charged. Partly because it's not clear whether Alec gets a new trial and what all is happening there. So I think that Becky's very much in limbo. Um, and
Because
I,
she wrote a book, and the book is what kind of put her on the chopping block, right?
yeah, it did. She wrote a book, Behind the Doors of Justice, and she has anecdotes about many of the people she got to know in the trial, including me and Craig Melvin or Joe McCulloch or Mark Tinsley or many of the people. Um, and I think I can remember the day that she really did go above and beyond in terms of like being the principal of the elementary school. And I can remember the day that Dick Harpootlian stood up and say, I just want to say, point of personal privilege, that Becky Hill is the best clerk of court I've ever met. And then Creighton stands up and says, I want to say that Becky Hill is the most amazing person. And so I think in the moment she was very well regarded. I think now it's created this utter chaos in this outer ring of a circus that, and we don't know where we're going to end up.
So if there's another trial, are you going to be there?
I feel like I'm in like one of these, like I'm getting my hair cut and I'm in like a barber.
She was like, I think our camera needs to be the other way. I don't know why I
Oh,
always do it this
yeah.
way. I feel like it makes me look tall.
Well, I love the vertical lines in your sweater. It's very cool. No, I did, I did read the Fourth Circuit decision that came down yesterday around Russell Laffitte, the banker.
Okay.
And he's going to be, Russell is going to be, he was granted a new trial on his financial charges related to all the criming because of the application of the application of the standard, that the federal standard around jury tampering, which in effect is like it's a pretty low bar. If somebody did something that was untoward in any way with the jury, that merits consideration. So that was a unanimous verdict of this three judge panel, as I understand it. And so the defense was gleeful because they're like, they have argued, and Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin both argued in state court that Chief Justice Toll was applying the wrong standard. She was applying the state standard that had a higher bar. So for the Fourth Circuit to say no, it's this lower bar, which the defense thinks they can get over. It's going to take a year, it's going to take 2 years, but they think their chances of getting a new trial on the discrete issue of the homicides are much higher.
Well, I you have given us an hour of your time, which I
No,
very much appreciate. The devil at his elbow, Alec Murdaugh in the fall of a Southern dynasty. Um, Valerie Bauerlein, order New York Times bestseller. And if you want to hear a podcast about it, our friend Seton Tucker has Impact of Influence, the Murdaugh family murders, um, which was we got connected through one of my high school friends was like, you need to talk to Seton. So I just appreciate your time so much. And it's so nice to meet you when I read your articles.
no, it's great. Thanks for having me on. I've followed you for a long time, and this case, I think, one of the things that we've seen over the past couple of months is the book has resonated with a lot of people. It is particularly sold well in the South, and the
Oh, isn't
turnout,
that interesting?
uh, for sure, it's nuts. So I think, and I've had several. I live in Raleigh, and I've had several people say to me, because we live in Raleigh, right? They're like, I don't know a family like that. I didn't grow up in the country, but I know a lot of kids like Paul. So I
Ah,
think there's something Southern that also is resonant with people. But thank you all so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
well, thank you. And I hope I get to see you when I'm up in the big city.
All right, let me know when you're here. I'm sorry I missed you today.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.